In the vast, cavernous space, two factions faced each other from a distance. However, both sides wore expressions of unease as they stared toward the direction from which they had entered. Earlier, they had suddenly seen two evil figures emerge from the space where Chen and his group had entered. The powerful aura radiating from these figures was enough to make even the peak experts on both sides feel the chilling presence of death. Clearly, the strength of these two figures surpassed theirs. However, it seemed that the two figures were fleeing from something, as they paid no attention to either of the factions and swiftly fled the cavern. "Those are the Extraterritorial Evil Clan," Ling, she said gravely, her face tightening with concern as she watched the two retreating figures. Upon hearing this, Luo Li and Wen Qingxuan's expressions changed. Luo Li's gaze turned toward the mystic dragon space, a flicker of worry passing through her translucent eyes. The fact that the Extraterritorial Evil Clan had escaped from this space meant they must have encountered Mu Chen's group. She couldn't help but wonder how Mu Chen was doing now. When Qingxian and the others shared the same thought. They exchanged a glance, their faces filled with anxiety. Meanwhile, across from them, the Wu family's experts were also visibly worried. Though they were not concerned about Mu Chen, they feared the sinister Extraterritorial Evil Clan. If something were to happen to Wu Tong, their mission would be a complete failure. Whoosh! As both sides stood in tension, the space vortex leading to the mystic dragon space suddenly trembled. In the next moment, a beam of light shot out. The light condensed under the watchful eyes of the anxious crowd, revealing Mu Chen's figure. Mu Chen. When they saw Mu Chen emerge safely, when Qingxian and the others breathed a collective sigh of relief, their tensed faces softening. Mu Chen gave them a reassuring nod. As he noticed the lingering fear on their faces, his heart stirred, and he asked, "Did you see the Extraterritorial Evil Clan that fled?" Everyone nodded in unison, and Luo Li, with a puzzled expression, asked, "What happened? How did the Extraterritorial Evil Clan end up in this space?" "That's the prince of the Corpse Demon Clan, Shi Tianyu. He followed us and infiltrated the mystic dragon space." Mu Chen's face grew serious. "He stole the corpse of the Demon Emperor." Hearing this, Luo Li and the others were stunned. The Demon Emperor's corpse was stolen? Mu Chen, what about our young master? At this moment, the Wu family's experts, looking pale and anxious, turned to Mu Chen. Mu Chen glanced at them coldly and said indifferently, "Wu Tong? He died at the hands of the Demon Emperor's corpse." The Wu family's team turned ashen. Dong Shan and the others were horrified, their faces filled with shock. They knew Wu Tong's strength all too well. To think that such a powerful figure had died in the mystic dragon space? Moreover, it was unclear whether he had died at the hands of the so-called Demon Emperor's corpse or Mu Chen. As a result, their gazes toward Mu Chen grew even more fearful and terrified. "Retreat!" Dong Shan's eyes flickered, and he suddenly shouted, retreating at full speed. His fellow demon slayers also immediately followed suit without hesitation. Now that Wu Tong was dead, their forces were no longer on par. Remaining here would only give the other side an opportunity to wipe them out. Seeing their quick retreat, the Wu family's experts gritted their teeth and immediately dispersed, choosing to withdraw. Their mission had failed, and staying here was meaningless. Mu Chen watched them retreat, his eyes flashing briefly. But in the end, he resisted the urge to wipe them all out, knowing that if a peak expert truly wanted to escape, capturing them would be troublesome. If, in the pursuit, they accidentally wandered into some terrifying natural disaster, it could backfire on him. As for whether the news of Wu Tong's death would make the Wu family view him as an enemy, Mu Chen didn't care. The Wu family only had one heavenly supreme, who would likely remain in their stronghold and wouldn't dare to take action lightly. As for those below heavenly supreme, they posed little threat to Mu Chen now. For now, his primary focus was on collecting the treasures within this ruin. They run fast enough. Wen Qingxian sneered as she watched the enemy disappear completely. She had no intention of chasing them down. Turning to Mu Chen, she said, "In the near future, our Wen family will likely be at war with the Wu family. So you don't have to worry about any retaliation from them. After all, it was they who invited Mu Chen to assist in the battle." Although she wasn't entirely sure who Wu Tong had been killed by, the Wu family would inevitably direct their anger at Mu Chen. Therefore, The Wen family had to protect Mu Chen from the Wu family. Mu Chen smiled and nodded, not rejecting Wen Qingxuan's kindness. He turned to look at the spatial vortex, then suddenly formed hand seals and activated a secret technique. Buzz. Buzz. As Mu Chen activated the secret technique, the mystic dragon space immediately emitted a buzzing sound, and the spatial vortex rapidly shrank, eventually transforming into a purple light that landed in Mu Chen's hand. It was a ring with a black dragon coiled around it, and faint spatial fluctuations emanated from within. Mu Chen couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This was no simple trick. The ring contained a small space, one that could allow living beings to enter. Wen Qingxian, Wen Ziyu, and the others who saw Mu Chen transform the spatial vortex into a ring couldn't help but widen their eyes in amazement. You obtained that mystic dragon army? Wen Qingxian asked, unable to hold back her curiosity. Mu Chen smiled and nodded. There was no point in hiding it. Anyone could guess as much. Seeing Mu Chen nod, Wen Qingxian and the others gasped, their gazes fixed on him as if they were staring at a monster. They knew full well just how powerful the mystic dragon army was. If Mu Chen could truly control it one day, even a heavenly supreme would be nothing to fear. Even Wen Ziyu and the others couldn't help but feel a bit envious of Mu Chen's acquisition. It seems like you're the biggest winner in this ruin, Wen Qingxian teased, though her tone held no trace of jealousy. She was a proud person and wouldn't feel envious of someone else's gains, knowing that those were the result of their own abilities. However, Mu Chen felt a little embarrassed. After all, the intelligence about this ruin belonged to Wen Qingxian and her family. If it weren't for their invitation, Mu Chen would never have found this ruin. We should split the pills in the ruin 50-50, Mu Chen said, recalling how Wen Qingxian had previously offered to change their share to an 80-20 split in her favor in exchange for the inheritance. Wen Qingxian shook her head in response. She tilted her delicate chin proudly and said, I said 80-20, so it's 80-20. Getting the mystic dragon army was your own achievement. It has nothing to do with us. Seeing Wen Qingxuan's insistence, Mu Chen could only smile helplessly but eventually nodded. He suddenly remembered that he now had to support an army with an insatiable appetite. If he didn't obtain enough supreme spiritual liquid, the mystic dragon army would likely run out of supplies in half a year. We should settle the spiritual pills in this ruin first, Luo Li smiled and suggested. Wen Qingxian also nodded gracefully, and everyone looked up at the cave ceiling. There, it resembled a starry sky, with stars twinkling. Each point of light was a spiritual pill. Wen Qingxian flicked her wrist, and the spirit butterfly pill furnace flew up. Streams of light erupted from it, and as the light passed, the starry sky seemed to transform into galloping rivers of stars, all rushing into the furnace. This process continued for over 10 minutes, with the torrents gradually dissipating. By then, the starry sky above the cave had completely vanished. Wen Qingxian closed her beautiful eyes, as if counting the spiritual pills in the furnace. After a moment, she opened her eyes, and her face revealed an undeniable look of astonishment. There are a total of 800 pills. Mu Chen and the others couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. They all knew that these 800 pills were all top-quality ones left behind by the spirit butterfly pill immortal. Just one of them could easily fetch millions of supreme spiritual liquid if auctioned in the Great Thousand Worlds. Mu Chen secretly breathed a sigh of relief. With these spiritual pills, he no longer had to worry about how he would feed the mystic dragon army when the supreme spiritual liquid ran out. Wen Qingxian lightly flicked her long, jade-like fingers, and 5 beams of light shot out of the pill furnace. They floated gently before her, emitting a pure and mysterious spiritual energy. As the beams faded, 5 crystal-clear, round pills appeared in front of them. The pill's surface was adorned with natural pill patterns, a testament to their high quality. When the 5 pills appeared, Mu Chen's gaze was firmly fixed on them, and then his eyes turned heated as he looked towards Wen Qingxian. Wen Qingxian smiled gently at him and said, "This is the sublimation pill. We'll take one, and the remaining 4 are yours," she added, holding a round, crystal-like pill with her jade fingers. With a wave of her sleeve, the other 4 pills flew towards Mu Chen. Mu Chen caught them carefully, looking at the 4 round, flawless pills in his hands with a sense of relief. Therefore, the Wen family had to protect Mu Chun from the Wu family. Mu Chun smiled and nodded, not rejecting Wen Qingxuan's kindness. He turned to look at the spatial vortex, then suddenly formed hand seals and activated a secret technique. Buzz. Buzz. As Mu Chun activated the secret technique, the mystic dragon space immediately emitted a buzzing sound, and the spatial vortex rapidly shrank, eventually transforming into a purple light that landed in Mu Chun's hand. It was a ring with a black dragon coiled around it, and faint spatial fluctuations emanated from within. Mu Chun couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This was no simple trick. The ring contained a small space, one that could allow living beings to enter. Wen Qingxian, Wen Ziyu, and the others who saw Mu Chun transform the spatial vortex into a ring couldn't help but widen their eyes in amazement. You obtained that mystic dragon army? Wen Qingxian asked, unable to hold back her curiosity. Mu Chun smiled and nodded. There was no point in hiding it. Anyone could guess as much. Seeing Mu Chun nod, Wen Qingxian and the others gasped, their gazes fixed on him as if they were staring at a monster. They knew full well just how powerful the mystic dragon army was. If Mu Chun could truly control it one day, even a heavenly supreme would be nothing to fear. Even Wen Ziyu and the others couldn't help but feel a bit envious of Mu Chun's acquisition. It seems like you're the biggest winner in this ruin, Wen Qingxian teased, though her tone held no trace of jealousy. She was a proud person and wouldn't feel envious of someone else's gains, knowing that those were the result of their own abilities. However, Mu Chun felt a little embarrassed. After all, the intelligence about this ruin belonged to Wen Qingxian and her family. If it weren't for their invitation, Mu Chun would never have found this ruin. We should split the pills in the ruin 50-50, Mu Chun said, recalling how Wen Qingxian had previously offered to change their share to an 80-20 split in her favor in exchange for the inheritance. Wen Qingxian shook her head in response. She tilted her delicate chin proudly and said, I said 80-20, so it's 80-20. Getting the mystic dragon army was your own achievement. It has nothing to do with us. Seeing Wen Qingxuan's insistence, Mu Chun could only smile helplessly but eventually nodded. He suddenly remembered that he now had to support an army with an insatiable appetite. If he didn't obtain enough supreme spiritual liquid, the mystic dragon army would likely run out of supplies in half a year. We should settle the spiritual pills in this ruin first, Luo Li smiled and suggested. Wen Qingxian also nodded gracefully, and everyone looked up at the cave ceiling. There, it resembled a starry sky, with stars twinkling. Each point of light was a spiritual pill. Wen Qingxian flicked her wrist, and the spirit butterfly pill furnace flew up. Streams of light erupted from it, and as the light passed, the starry sky seemed to transform into galloping rivers of stars, all rushing into the furnace. This process continued for over 10 minutes, with the torrents gradually dissipating. By then, the starry sky above the cave had completely vanished. Wen Qingxian closed her beautiful eyes, as if counting the spiritual pills in the furnace. After a moment, she opened her eyes, and her face revealed an undeniable look of astonishment. There are a total of 800 pills. Mu Chun and the others couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. They all knew that these 800 pills were all top-quality ones left behind by the spirit butterfly pill immortal. Just one of them could easily fetch millions of supreme spiritual liquid if auctioned in the Great Thousand Worlds. Mu Chun secretly breathed a sigh of relief. With these spiritual pills, he no longer had to worry about how he would feed the mystic dragon army when the supreme spiritual liquid ran out. Wen Qingxian lightly flicked her long, jade-like fingers, and 5 beams of light shot out of the pill furnace. They floated gently before her, emitting a pure and mysterious spiritual energy. As the beams faded, 5 crystal-clear, round pills appeared in front of them. The pill's surface was adorned with natural pill patterns, a testament to their high quality. When the 5 pills appeared, Mu Chun's gaze was firmly fixed on them, and then his eyes turned heated as he looked towards Wen Qingxian. Wen Qingxian smiled gently at him and said, "This is the sublimation pill. We'll take one, and the remaining 4 are yours," she added, holding a round, crystal-like pill with her jade fingers. With a wave of her sleeve, the other 4 pills flew towards Mu Chun. Mu Chun caught them carefully, looking at the 4 round, flawless pills in his hands with a sense of relief. After speaking a few words to Luoli and Wenqin Xian, he stood up and headed toward the training room carved into the side of the cave. We should break through too. Watching Mu Qin's retreating figure, Wen Ziyu and Long Xiang also stood up, eager to speak. Within the spirit butterfly ruins, they had obtained a sacred spirit pill. With their current accumulation, breaking through to the perfect Earth Supreme realm should be an inevitable process. The confrontation in the spirit butterfly ruins had already made them realize that half-step great perfection strength could barely protect them in the ancient sacred abyss. To become top-tier combatants, they needed to reach true great perfection. Please take care of the night watch. Luo Li smiled faintly at Wenqin Xian and Ling Shi, then also stood up and entered a training room. From Mu Qin, she had received a sublimation pill, which was of great importance to her as well. After all, the Luo Xin divine body she cultivated was, in a sense, the true orthodox supreme body listed on the supreme body ranking, with a status second to none. As they dispersed, the cave fell into silence. When Qin Xian and Ling Shi exchanged a helpless glance, smiled, then closed their eyes, entering a shallow cultivation state. In the vast training room within the massive cave, Mu Qin sat quietly like a rock. Before him, a crystalline round pill floated serenely in the air, releasing a faint fragrance that made the surrounding spiritual energy ripple. Mu Qin stared at the crystalline sublimation pill, then took a deep breath. His hands suddenly formed seals, and spiritual light surged from his body. Behind him, an immortal golden body several hundred feet tall rapidly formed. The sublimation pill could randomly elevate the cultivation of one's divine abilities by one level. But if he activated the ability before swallowing the pill, the probability of improvement was significantly higher. So Mu Qin wasn't worried about the boost landing on any ability other than the one he wanted. If that happened, he could only say it was bad luck. With the immortal golden body taking shape, Mu Qin no longer hesitated. He opened his mouth and swallowed the sublimation pill. Boom. As the sublimation pill entered his mouth, it instantly shattered. An indescribably cold sensation spread through Mu Qin's limbs, and the next moment, a peculiar feeling surged deep into his soul. In that instant, it was as if he had gained infinite wisdom, and some of the obstacles he had encountered in his cultivation vanished into thin air. Mu Qin's eyes tightly shut, his face calm, as if he had entered a state of enlightenment. Behind him, the immortal golden body assumed a cultivation posture, its massive frame glowing with mysterious purple gold light, as if it were gestating something. The enormous cave fell silent once more. The next day, the snowflakes had dispersed, and surprisingly, the once frozen land was quickly melting away. Boom. Suddenly, two immense and powerful waves of spiritual energy shot up from a cave carved into the mountainside. The next moment, two figures burst through the cave and soared into the sky. The two figures howled to the sky, their roars like thunder, echoing endlessly, as they summoned a storm of spiritual energy. Shut up. Outside the mountain cave, when Qin Xian shot a glare at the two figures in midair and let out a sharp rebuke. In the sky, when Ziyu and Long Xiang exchanged a glance, quickly shutting their mouths, though the joy in their eyes was impossible to hide. Thanks to the sacred spirit pill, they had finally broken through the barrier that had kept them stagnant for so long and truly reached the level of perfect Earth Supreme. At that moment, a tightly shut stone door to a cultivation room suddenly opened, revealing Luo Li stepping out gracefully, her demeanor elegant. Luo Li, how is it? When Qin Xian asked curiously, eager to find out whether the so-called sublimation pill truly had such miraculous effects. However, Luo Li merely smiled faintly and replied, the sublimation pill is indeed worthy of being the masterpiece of spirit butterfly pill immortal. Hearing this somewhat vague reply, when Qingshuan's curiosity was piqued even more. She wanted to ask further, but Luo Li only offered a mysterious smile, which left her feeling slightly frustrated. Boom. At that moment, another stone door suddenly shattered, and Mu Qin's figure appeared, drawing everyone's attention. Mu Qin, did you succeed? When Qin Xian turned her focus to him, Mu Qin exchanged a look with Luo Li, grinning as he said, Spirit Butterfly Pill Immortal's reputation is well-deserved. Seeing the identical expressions on their faces, when Qin Xian couldn't help but grind her teeth in frustration. These two really were quite the pair. From their reactions, however, when Qin Xian could tell that the sublimation pill had indeed worked wonders for them. Let's go to the gathering point. Mu Qin didn't say much more, waving his hand at the group and speaking crisply. With those words, he tapped his toes, and his figure shot up like a flash of light, speeding toward the depths of the ancient abyss. Behind him, countless light shadows followed, vast and powerful. Swoosh! The vast heavens were filled with an ancient aura, and the eternal silence that had seemed to linger for ages was suddenly shattered. Several streams of light shot across the sky, moving with incredible speed toward the distance. As the ground below retreated rapidly, a massive city silhouette appeared in the far distance. The city was enormous, and from afar, it resembled a colossal beast lying flat on the earth. "We're almost there," when Chen exclaimed excitedly as she saw the outline of the city on the horizon. After 2 full days of travel, they had finally reached their destination. Chen and the others sighed in relief. Traveling through the ancient sacred abyss was no easy feat. The various natural disasters that even Earth Supremes feared could strike at any time. During these 2 days, they had encountered no fewer than 5 terrifying natural disasters, one of which, a destruction lightning zone, had nearly cost them their lives. But thankfully, they had finally arrived. As they drew closer to the area, Chen noticed that in another direction, a team was occasionally soaring through the sky, heading toward the broken city in the distance. In that city, Chen sensed many powerful fluctuations of spiritual energy. "Looks like many teams have gathered at this point," Chen muttered, his eyes narrowing. He estimated that about 7 or 8 out of every 10 teams that entered the ancient sacred abyss would end up here. This made it clear just how chaotic and mixed the situation was at the gathering point. "Everyone, be careful," Chen reminded them telepathically as the city drew nearer. Luoli, when Chen and the others nodded. Most of the teams that entered the ancient sacred abyss were formidable, and any conflict could quickly turn troublesome. As their light figures streaked through the sky, they eventually landed just outside the city gate. Upon approaching, they sensed a faint but powerful spiritual energy fluctuation in the air above the city. The fluctuation was chaotic, and if they rashly entered, they might trigger a spiritual backlash. "That's a shattered spirit array, and it's a high-level one. It's probably not weaker than the city protection spiritual array of Sacred Abyss City," Lingxi observed, her beautiful eyes fixed on the turbulent spiritual energy above the city, her voice filled with surprise. Chen nodded lightly upon hearing this. Although the spiritual array was damaged, he still sensed a dangerous aura emanating from it. However, he wasn't surprised. After all, in ancient times, this place was one of the battlegrounds between the Great Thousand Worlds and the Extraterritorial Evil Clan, so it was only natural to find such high-level spiritual arrays here. "Let's go." At the broken city gates, groups of people gradually descended and entered the city, keeping their guard up as they proceeded. Chen waved his hand and stepped into the city first. As he entered, the ruined visual landscape immediately hit him. Yet, from the shattered buildings, he could still faintly sense how prosperous this city must have been in ancient times. Tall towers stood in the city. It was said that the top-tier powerhouses from the ancient era liked to forge cultivation towers, each of which represented one of the strongest experts. This ruined city, however, now seemed to have regained some vitality, with teams from all directions converging here, filling the air with chatter and noise. In this city, there's a trading area. Many teams, during their explorations, find some unknown items, perhaps treasures, or maybe worthless things. But overall, it's worth checking out, when Chen, who had clearly gathered a lot of information about this gathering point, said with a smile, pointing towards the deeper parts of the city. Chen's heart stirred at her words. The ancient sacred abyss was vast, and many peak powerhouses had perished here. As a result, there were numerous treasures, and some people might come across them but fail to recognize their value, treating them as useless. So, if they were lucky enough to stumble upon such treasures, it would indeed be a blessing. "We'll handle the information. Our one family has some sources we can check with. You can head to the trading area and wait for us," when Chen suggested. "All right." Chen pondered for a moment and nodded. These were one family's sources of information, and it wouldn't be appropriate for them to tag along. "See you later," when Chen waved and, along with Wen Ziyu and the others, headed in the opposite direction. Chen watched them leave, then turned and walked towards the trading area with Luoli, Lingxi, and Long Xiang. They crossed several broken streets, and soon, they could hear the bustling noise ahead. The abandoned plaza was filled with people coming and going, brimming with life. In normal circumstances, such crowds would not be noteworthy. But in the remote ancient sacred abyss, this was the only place where people had gathered. It was clear that this was the trading area when Chen had mentioned earlier. Chen, Luoli, and Lingxi exchanged curious glances before stepping into the ruined plaza. Broken giant stones littered the area, and some people were seated on them, their stalls displaying all kinds of strange items. These items carried an ancient aura, covered in the marks of time, giving them a sense of age and history. Mu Chen stopped in front of a large stone and scanned the items spread out before him. Some were obviously sacred artifacts, carelessly displayed, and faint spiritual energy fluctuations could be sensed from them. He casually picked up a black longsword. The blade had cracks and appeared dull, but the occasional subtle release of spiritual energy made it seem somewhat extraordinary. Heh, my friend has an eye for this sword. This blade was forged from 9 nether-cold iron and starry sky stone. It is indestructible. In its prime, it was beyond high-tier sacred artifacts, and it's possible that it was once an unrivaled treasure left by a heavenly supreme. A gray-robed man behind the stall grinned and said, "In the great thousand worlds, beyond high-tier sacred artifacts, there existed a more advanced rank, the peerless sacred artifacts. However, peerless sacred artifacts were so rare and powerful that even some heavenly supremes could never possess them. Based on Mu Chen's estimation, his Heavenly Emperor sword should also be a peerless sacred artifact. At its peak, it might have even been considered the top-tier peerless sacred artifact." Mu Chen smiled as he gripped the black longsword and casually asked, "How much?" "An incredibly low price. 50 million supreme spiritual liquid," the gray-robed man immediately replied. Mu Chen smiled, casually tossing the black longsword in his hand aside as he turned to leave with Luo Li and the others, without wasting a single word on the man. The black longsword might indeed be an ancient artifact, but regardless of how powerful it once was, it had long since been broken, even corroded by the passage of time into a useless blade. The man in the gray robe, seeing Mu Chen leave without hesitation, muttered a curse under his breath and retreated once more. Mu Chen and his group weaved through the bustling trading area. As they went along, they saw all sorts of ancient treasures, though most of them were nothing but counterfeit relics pretending to be rare artifacts. Despite the abundance of junk, there were still a few items of interest. At one stall, Mu Chen noticed 2 particular objects that stood out. Based on his assessment, they definitely belonged to a heavenly supreme, and not a low-ranking one at that. The 1-foot-long staff, before it was shattered, should have been a truly peerless sacred artifact. Though Mu Chen recognized the value of these items, he refrained from purchasing them. Too many people had their eyes on them, and those who did were wealthy enough to raise the price to over 100 million in just a few minutes. Mu Chen, at his current level, lacked the resources to buy such shattered treasures. Even if he acquired them, restoring them would require immense resources. As they continued on, Mu Chen's group left empty-handed, feeling slightly disappointed that they hadn't found anything worthwhile. Mu Chen glanced around and realized they were about to exit the trading area. Just as he was about to lead everyone to meet Wen Qingxian and the others, he paused as he passed a large stone. His eyes flickered for a moment before he suddenly stopped in his tracks, calmly gazing at the stone. It had a small stall set up with several items emitting an ancient aura, though their spiritual energy was faint. Mu Chen carefully scanned the objects, his gaze finally resting on a piece of shimmering copper, covered in dirt. After a brief hesitation, he wiped off the dirt, revealing a gleaming surface. It appeared to be a broken copper shard, but it was polished so smooth and bright that Mu Chen could make out faint ancient runes on it, suggesting it had a significant history in ancient times. As Mu Chen stared at the shard, his expression remained calm, but his heart couldn't help but race. When he had passed the stone earlier, he had felt his dark floating pagoda vibrate slightly. Now, as he held the copper shard, the vibrations became more intense. If he hadn't suppressed it, the dark floating pagoda might have revealed itself. Clearly, this object was linked to the Futu ancient clan. Mu Chen's gaze flickered briefly before he turned to the stall owner, a middle-aged man dressed in ragged robes. "How much?" he asked. The middle-aged man looked Mu Chen over slowly before responding casually, 80 million. Mu Chen raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that a bit too much?" The middle-aged man chuckled and said, "Friend, I don't know what this object is, but I do know that even when I attacked it with all my strength, I couldn't even scratch it. That's enough to prove its extraordinary nature. It's a good thing I don't know how to use it. Otherwise, do you think I'd be selling it?" Mu Chen was speechless. It seemed that anyone who could reach the ancient sacred abyss wasn't to be underestimated. This man had sharp eyes. So Mu Chen didn't argue further. With a flick of his sleeve, a jade bottle flew toward the middle-aged man. He grasped the copper shard and said, "I'll take it." However, just at that moment, a hand suddenly reached out from behind him, as if it had pierced through space itself, attempting to seize the copper shard from Mu Chen's hand. A cold, indifferent voice followed. "I'll take it. I'll take it." The moment that indifferent voice rang out, a hand shot through space to grab the copper shard from Mu Chen's hand. The speed was as fast as lightning, catching everyone off guard. If it had been anyone else, they might not have been able to react in time. But Mu Chen was clearly not just anyone. As the hand reached out, his face turned icy, and a sharp glint flickered in his pitch-black eyes. He paid no attention to the copper piece that was about to be taken, and with a swift motion, his other hand pulled back and transformed into a hand strike. At the same time, the sacred floating pagoda appeared in his eyes, and the vast and powerful spiritual energy surged into his palm like a flood. Buzz. The spiritual energy, as solid as substance, fluctuated and condensed in Mu Chen's palm, forming a blade-like edge. The spiritual light blade vibrated, and even space itself seemed to tear apart. If this strike landed, even the arm of someone at the perfect Earth Supreme level would be severed in an instant. Huh. As the spiritual blade struck fiercely, a surprised voice sounded at that moment, clearly startled by Mu Chen's fierce and decisive counterattack. At this point, if the person insisted on snatching the copper piece, Mu Chen would probably leave both his hand and the copper piece behind in the blink of an eye. Humph. The attacker thought for a moment before changing his grip into 2 fingers. He curled his fingers together, and immense spiritual energy gathered, launching a powerful strike toward Mu Chen's palm blade, as if it were a direct challenge. Swoosh. In the next moment, the 2 strikes collided violently, creating visible ripples of spiritual energy. The surrounding space shattered like glass. The fragments of space shot out, and both Mu Chen and the attacker quickly retreated. With a wave of his sleeve, a torrent of spiritual energy surged forth, scattering the sharp space fragments in all directions. As their figures moved back, Mu Chen's gaze, now laced with killing intent, rose to meet the attacker. His eyes narrowed slightly, because he recognized the attacker, none other than the young master Moxin of the Futu ancient clan. At this moment, Moxin stood expressionless, glaring at Mu Chen, his eyes cold as ice. He extended his hand and said indifferently, "Give me that." His tone was calm, but it carried an unmistakable arrogance. After all, with his status, few from the younger generation of the Futu ancient clan dared to take what he wanted. But unfortunately for him, Mu Chen was not among those who would bow down. So when he heard Moxin's words, Mu Chen merely smiled, his expression indifferent, and said, "Although you come from the Futu ancient clan, it seems your parents never taught you about manners. Sin child, you seek death." Upon hearing Mu Chen's mockery, Moxin's gaze instantly turned cold, and a murderous aura surged from his eyes, causing the area to suddenly chill. The trading area was crowded, and their standoff immediately attracted many curious gazes. However, no one spoke up to stop them. Instead, they watched with interest, because in the ancient sacred abyss, there were no rules, strength was the ultimate law. Many powerful figures had heard of Moxin, knowing that he was a young master of the Futu ancient clan, and that he was formidable. What puzzled them, however, was that the youth named Mu Chen appeared to be only at the upper Earth Supreme level, yet he dared to mock Moxin so boldly. What gave him the courage to do so? As many eyes focused on the area, several figures atop a nearby boulder halted and looked toward the confrontation. Upon seeing that it was Mu Chen and Moxin, their expressions changed slightly. This guy really doesn't know his place. How could he provoke Moxin? A delicate voice said in frustration. It came from a young girl, her beauty striking, but her gaze now filled with anger as she looked toward the standoff. This girl was none other than Qing Ling of the Futu ancient clan. Beside her stood a delicate woman dressed in white, exuding an ice-cold aura like a snow mountain, Qing Shuang of the Futu ancient clan. She glanced at the situation ahead, her brows furrowed slightly. As a member of the Futu ancient clan, she was well aware of Moxin's power. Among the younger generation of the clan, only he could rival Xian Luo in strength. As for her, even if she gave her all, she could only ensure her own survival, let alone gain the upper hand. Both Moxin and Xian Luo were at the pinnacle of great perfection, essentially invincible beneath the heavenly supreme level. Mu Chen, for some reason, had clashed with Moxin, and the consequences were likely to be disastrous. At this thought, Qing Shuang gritted her silver teeth, about to step forward. She had promised Aunt Xian to offer Mu Chen some help so that he wouldn't fall prey to Xian Luo or Moxin. So, even though she knew that making an enemy of Moxin wouldn't do her any good, she still chose to step forward. Seeing this, Qing Ling instinctively wanted to stop Qing Shuang. After all, she knew very well that making an enemy of Moxin would put not just Qing Shuang but also herself under a lot of pressure. However, Qing Shuang simply waved her hand, signaling for Qingling to stop, causing Qingling to stomp her foot in frustration. She glared at Mu Chen, who was at the center of the storm in the distance, annoyed that they had just arrived and already got dragged into this mess because of him. She quickly caught up to Qing Shuang, but just as she was about to step forward, Qing Shuang suddenly paused. Her body came to a halt. Qing Shuang, what's wrong? Qingling asked, puzzled. Had Qing Shuang changed her mind? But after all, Mu Chen was Aunt Jing's son, and technically, he was one of their Qing bloodline's people. It felt wrong to just stand by and let him be targeted here. Qingling was torn, conflicted by her own feelings. But Qing Shuang paid no attention to her internal struggle. With a cold, frosty expression, she turned her gaze to the right. Qingling followed her line of sight, and her expression immediately changed. Not far away, several figures stood. At the front, there was a tall, handsome man standing with his hands behind his back. He was smiling and watching Qing Shuang, making her unable to take another step. It's Xian Luo. Why is he here? Qingling whispered, her face darkening. Qing Shuang's expression grew even colder. She knew what Xian Luo's gaze meant. If she tried to help Mu Chen, he would step in to stop her. Her jade-like hand clenched into a fist, her eyes flashing briefly, but ultimately, she didn't take another step. She knew it would be futile. If Xian Luo decided to stop her, she wouldn't be able to break through. Mu Chen, I hope you find a way to escape soon, she thought, sighing inwardly as she looked at Mu Chen in the center of the storm. Xian Luo, seeing Qing Shuang stop, casually withdrew his gaze and then turned his eyes playfully to Mu Chen's figure in the distance, murmuring to himself, what are these two fighting over? Because of the distance, he could tell that Mu Chen and Moxin were fighting over something, but he didn't know exactly what it was. He also wasn't sure if Moxin was intentionally causing trouble for Mu Chen, drawing close just to provoke him. Is that the Sin child from your Futu ancient clan, who's been causing quite a stir lately? Just as Xian Luo was pondering, a soft, somewhat alluring voice, laced with a hint of charm, reached his ears. The voice belonged to a woman dressed in a dark gown. She had an extraordinarily beautiful face, with skin like white jade and eyebrows shaped like a crescent moon. When she smiled, her eyes glimmered with a trace of allure, yet her noble and pure aura made the allure seem all the more delicate and enchanting. She was a natural beauty. It seems like Miss Xun'er is quite familiar with the news from our Futu ancient clan, Xian Luo smiled. The woman, named Xun'er, blinked her bright eyes and said, after all, I'm also the candidate saintess of the Supreme Spirit ancient clan. It's not surprising that I know such things, right? Xian Luo smiled and nodded. The woman in the dark gown, by Xun'er, was one of the most prominent candidate saintesses of the Supreme Spirit ancient clan. It was said that if she succeeded in her task in the ancient sacred abyss, she would most likely be confirmed as the saintess of the clan. Given her status, she would naturally have connections with Xian Luo. And by Xun'er smiled gracefully, but as her gaze shifted, it lingered on the brilliant girl standing next to Mu Chen. Her eyes showed a trace of something indescribable. The girl next to him is my biggest rival in the ancient sacred abyss, she said. Lower Earth Supreme? Not a concern. How could she possibly compete with Miss by Xun'er? Xian Luo laughed, his eyes briefly flicking over Luoli. He too was momentarily impressed, but quickly masked it. Xian Luo, you sure know how to flatter, by Xun'er laughed lightly, her voice playful and mischievous. As the two of them conversed, in the trading area, with more people gathering, Moxin's murderous aura grew more intense. The next moment, he suddenly stepped forward. Boom. A terrifying surge of spiritual energy, so formidable that it made many powerful figures present flinch slightly, swept across the area like a volcanic eruption. At the same time, Moxin's voice, filled with murderous intent, rang out. If you refuse my invitation for a drink, then come with me to the Futu ancient clan and have some prison wine. You worthless, arrogant Sin child.